Justice, before it wore robes and carried scales, wore a leather whip and a river current, and across the ancient world, the line between punishment and spectacle barely existed at all. Every civilization that built cities also built ways to break the people who broke its rules. Some of those methods were coldly logical. Others defy explanation. All of them were designed to be seen ancient Mesopotamia. Around 2100 BCE, the Sumerian king Ur-Nammu issued what is now considered the oldest surviving law code in human history. It predates Hammurabi's laws by roughly 3 centuries. Most of its surviving clauses do not order death. They order silver. A man who broke another man's bone paid a fine. A man who cut off another man's foot paid 10 shekels. Compensation, not mutilation, was the default. Killing a productive worker was economically wasteful. But adultery was different. A married woman caught with another man faced drowning, and both parties were bound and thrown into the river together. The river did not just punish. In Mesopotamian law, it judged. A person accused of a crime with no witnesses could be thrown into the Euphrates in a practice called the river ordeal. If the accused sank, the river had declared them innocent and they were pulled out and released. If they floated, the river had convicted them and they were executed on the bank. Guilt in Babylon sometimes depended on whether a human body was denser than water. By 1754 BCE, Hammurabi's code hardened this system into something closer to formal deterrence. Its most famous clauses invoke lex talionis directly. A builder whose house collapsed and killed the owner's son was executed by having his own son put to death. A surgeon whose operation caused a patient's death could lose the hand that held the blade. The code did not apply equally. Punishments shifted by social class. A noble who blinded a commoner paid a fine. A commoner who blinded a noble lost an eye. Justice, carved into a diorite stele nearly 8 feet tall, was precise about exactly whose eye counted less. Ancient Egypt, tomb robbery in Egypt was not treated as theft. It was treated as an assault on eternity itself, and the new kingdom prosecuted it accordingly. The tomb robbery papyri, court records from the reign of Ramesses IX, around 1108 BCE, describe the trials of men caught looting the royal necropolis at Thebes. Confessions in these documents were extracted through beating on the soles of the feet, a method called the bastinado, applied until the accused named accomplices. Convicted tomb robbers faced impalement on a sharpened stake, a punishment reserved for crimes considered a threat to cosmic order. Egyptians believed the preserved body was required for the soul to survive in the afterlife. Impalement, and the mutilation that sometimes followed conviction, was not only physical punishment. It was designed to be a spiritual one. A thief who stole from the living faced the loss of a hand. A thief who stole from the dead sometimes faced the loss of an afterlife. Egyptian courts also relied heavily on forced labor as punishment for lesser offenses. Convicted criminals were sent to work in the gold mines of Nubia or the quarries of the eastern desert, environments with mortality rates high enough that a labor sentence functioned as a slow execution in practice, even when it was recorded on paper as something less final. Desert exile carried its own quiet cruelty. A criminal banished from the Nile Valley was cut off from the only reliably fertile land in the region. Egypt's civilization existed almost entirely within a narrow green corridor bordering the river. Beyond it was sand, and beyond the sand, very little survival. Ancient Rome. Rome inherited crucifixion from earlier Near Eastern and Carthaginian practice, and turned it into an instrument of mass political messaging. After the slave revolt led by Spartacus was crushed in 71 BCE, the historian Appian recorded that 6,000 surviving rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, the road connecting Capua to Rome, spaced so that the site would be unavoidable for over 100 miles. Crucifixion was rarely used on Roman citizens. It was reserved for slaves, pirates, and enemies of the state, and death by asphyxiation could take days. Rome also devised something stranger for a specific crime: parricide, the murder of a parent. The convicted was sewn into a leather sack, together with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, and thrown into the Tiber River to drown alongside the animals. The logic, according to Roman jurist accounts, was exile from every element at once. Not fit for earth, air, water, or the company of any living creature, human or otherwise. The jurist Modestinus, writing under the later empire, noted that the punishment of the sack, known as poena culae, was reserved specifically because parricide was considered an offense so unnatural that ordinary execution failed to address it. Rome had methods for killing people. This one was built to erase them from every category of the natural world at once. Roman law also codified damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, in which convicted criminals were sent unarmed into the arena to face lions, leopards, or bears as a form of public execution disguised as entertainment. Attendance was often free. The audience numbered in the tens of thousands. Qin Dynasty China, when Xiangyang restructured Qin law in the 4th century BCE, he built a legal philosophy around one core idea. Punishment had to be certain, severe, and impossible to escape through rank. The 5 punishments codified under Qin legalism were tattooing the face, cutting off the nose, amputating one or both feet, castration, and death. Each carried its own visible, permanent mark, so a convicted person's crime remained legible on their body for life. Xiangyang also implemented collective responsibility through a system of household groups of 5 or 10 families. If one member of the group committed a crime and the others failed to report it, the entire group was punished as though they had committed it themselves. Under this system, silence became as dangerous as guilt. Xiangyang himself was eventually executed by a punishment historically associated with his own legal reforms. Torn apart by chariots pulling in opposite directions, the man who built the machine was fed into it. Qin law also punished intent almost as harshly as action. A soldier who failed to meet a mobilization deadline because of a flood or a broken bridge could still face execution, since Qin administrators treated circumstance as irrelevant to the letter of the code. This rigidity is recorded by the Han-era historian Sima Qian as one of the pressures that eventually fed rebellion against the dynasty itself. Less than 15 years after Qin Shi Huang unified China in 221 BCE, a legal system built entirely on fear collapsed the moment enough people calculated that rebellion carried better odds than compliance. Achaemenid Persia, Greek writers, most notably Ctesias of Cnidus and later Plutarch, described a Persian execution method known to modern historians as Scaphism, or the boats. Its historical accuracy is debated among scholars, since no Persian source confirms it, and Greek accounts of Persian cruelty were sometimes exaggerated for political effect. As described in these Greek sources, the condemned was placed inside 2 hollowed boats, one nested over the other, with only the head, hands, and feet exposed. The prisoner was force-fed milk and honey and left in the sun, with more honey smeared on the exposed skin to attract insects. Death, when it came, was said to take days, caused by dehydration, exposure, and infection. Whether or not Scaphism was ever actually practiced exactly as Greek writers claimed, the story itself became a kind of psychological weapon. Fear of a punishment can control a population almost as effectively as the punishment itself. Sparta. Spartan society did not simply punish deviance. It built an entire institution around identifying it before it became a threat. The Kryptia was a secret organization of young Spartan men sent out, primarily at night, to monitor the Helot population, the enslaved class that vastly outnumbered Spartan citizens, and worked their land. Ancient sources, including Plutarch, describe Kryptia members killing Helots who appeared physically strong or showed signs of independent leadership. Without trial, without formal accusation, and without any need to justify the killing afterward. This was not punishment for a crime that had happened. It was punishment for a crime that might happen someday, carried out preemptively against people who had done nothing yet. Fear, in Sparta, was administered as a matter of state policy on a schedule. The Aztec Empire, Aztec law under the Triple Alliance treated public drunkenness with a severity that seems almost inverted to modern eyes. For most citizens, a first offense of public intoxication was punished with shaved heads and the public destruction of their homes. A second offense could mean death by strangulation. Nobility received harsher treatment than commoners for the same crime, a rare inversion of typical ancient legal hierarchy. An elite Aztec caught drunk in public could be executed outright, since nobles were expected to embody self-control as a condition of their status. Adultery carried its own brutal calculus. Both parties, if caught, faced execution by stoning or strangulation, and the law made no distinction for social rank in this particular offense. Dothraki, in the Aztec world, sometimes bought no protection at all. In the case of public drunkenness, it bought a shorter sentence, carried out with a rope instead of a wall. Ancient Israel and the Levant biblical law, codified across the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, formalized the principle known as lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. In practice, rabbinic legal tradition that developed later largely interpreted these passages as requiring monetary compensation rather than literal physical retaliation. But some prescribed penalties were carried out literally, and stoning was among the most common methods of executions described for capital offenses, including certain sexual crimes and idolatry. Deuteronomy specifies that witnesses to the crime were required to throw the first stones, placing direct physical responsibility for the execution on the accusers rather than a separate executioner class. Anonymity, under this system, was not an option. The people who condemned you were also the people who killed you, standing close enough to see it happen. Carthaginian military law operated on a principle almost unmatched in the ancient world. Failure was treated as functionally identical to betrayal. Generals who lost major battles, particularly against Rome, faced crucifixion upon return home, regardless of the circumstances of the defeat. This was not reserved for cowardice or desertion. Simple failure to win was enough. The practice created a peculiar strategic pressure. Carthaginian commanders reportedly fought with a level of desperation that went beyond ordinary battlefield stakes, because losing and dying were sometimes functionally the same outcome. A general who survived the battlefield could still lose everything at the city gates. Ancient India, the Arthashastra, a treatise on statecraft attributed to the minister Kautilya and compiled sometime between the 4th century BCE and the 2nd century CE, laid out punishments calibrated with almost bureaucratic precision to the exact value of what was stolen. A thief caught stealing gold above a certain threshold faced execution by trampling under an elephant's foot, a method used publicly enough to function as both punishment and warning. Lesser theft brought fines scaled precisely to the item's value, tracked with a level of administrative detail unusual for the period. The Arthashastra also authorized the use of state spies disguised as merchants, ascetics, and even poisoners, embedded throughout the kingdom to report disloyalty before it could organize into rebellion. Kautilya's central assumption was blunt. A ruler who waited for proof of treason before acting had already waited too long. Across every one of these civilizations, one pattern holds constant. Punishment was never only about the individual being punished. It was theater, performed for everyone still watching, still free, still deciding whether the risk of breaking the law was worth it. The methods differed by continent and by century. The message underneath them did not. Be seen breaking the rules, and the state will make sure everyone else sees what happens next.